In this first video about Stata, Getting Started Part 1, we'll talk about the Stata windows. There's 5 of them. We'll talk something about the drop-down menus, in particular the ones that we will use most often. I will open a Stata data file, a .dta file, and I'll do a few simple commands. I'll show you that they're case sensitive, and I will do a few simple commands both in the command line and using the drop-down menus. When you open Stata, it should look something like this. Now, getting to this point, you may use different ways of doing it, maybe through the virtual lab, and depending on what kind of computer you have, it may be different ways of getting to Stata. But once you get here, then everybody's should look very similar. And I'll point out several things, and that's the 5 windows. Over here on the left-hand side is the review window, which will have the commands that you have already done. Not much there, because I haven't done much. This big window in the middle is the results window, and again, not much there because I haven't done much. The command window down here is where I will type the commands. Over here on the right-hand side are the variables. So this has to do with the data set that I have open. It has the variables listed for the data set. And here, the right lower is the properties of the variables in the data set. So let's open a data set. I've already have a Stata data set saved. Now your directory structure is going to be different than my directory structure, but let's assume that you already have your data saved as a Stata data set. We'll talk later about if it's saved in some other different way or if you have to enter it. But I already have this saved as a Stata data set, and this is a diastolic blood pressure data set, and it's the one that we use in week 1 in the lectures. And I'm going to browse until I find the one that I'm looking for. It's a Stata data set, diastolic blood pressure with 23 observations. I'm going to double click on it to open it. And I see something happened here. Happened quickly, but over here in the review window, something popped up. It said use and then a long line. Something happened in the results. It created something for me. So when I opened something, it created a command for me. It said to use this data set. And over here, the variables popped up, and they're the variables in the data set that I'm interested in. That has the PID, diastolic blood pressure, and gender. Now I'm going to do a real simple command, and I'm going to just type it. We'll talk about this in a minute. And this simple command is list. Not surprisingly, it just lists all the observations. Again, this is a data set that we work with in week 1. It just has 23 observations, okay, 1 through 23. And then it has, this data set has 3 variables, ID, diastolic blood pressure, gender. And I can see the observations themselves, the data values. I can see how many observations, I can see the variables. Over here, I can see the variable names. I can see some of them have labels. And I can also see how all these windows are working together. This list over here on the left-hand side keeps a record of what I've already done. It shows me a historical record of the kinds of commands that I've done. Now, I don't want to remember all these commands that I'm going to need. List is a pretty easy one, but I want to be able to use, remember some commands, but also be able to use drop-down menus to create commands. And so some of the drop-down menus that are going to be most helpful, let's look up here. In this data drop-down menu, this describe data drop-down menu is going to be very helpful. And one of the ones under the data, describe data, list data is what we just did. So I could have done, let's say I want to list just gender. I could have done what I just did. Let's just say I wanted to list gender and I didn't remember the command. I could do it with the drop-down menu. And there it listed the gender for me. Great. Another drop-down menu that's going to be helpful in the next week or 2 is going to be this graphics drop-down menu. And these first 4, 5, 6 options we're going to use a lot to do graphs. Also, we're going to use a lot, especially the first week or 2, under statistics, summaries, tables, and tests, over here at summary and descriptive statistics, and then a lot of these are going to be very important for us. In particular, let's go over here to summary statistics, and it gives me a pop-up box. And let's just leave the first, leave this blank. I could leave it as standard display, but let's just click on display additional statistics. I can either click OK or submit. The only difference here is one closes the pop-up box and one leaves it open. And I see it generated this command over here, summarize, detail. And the result in the results window, what it did was to summarize all of the variables, all of the numeric variables, and it gave me lots of detail. So it summarized the PID. That's not very interesting, but it gave me the for the diastolic blood pressure, it gave me some things like the mean and the standard deviation. It gave me the 50th percentile, which is all interesting. So now I know what the syntax is for that. Let's see that I could just type that out. Well, one thing I could do is I could click on it, and look, when I click on it, it pops back up into the command window. And maybe I want to just summarize the diastolic blood pressure. And so I say summarize diastolic blood pressure and hit return, and it just gives me the diastolic blood pressure. What if I typed summarize with a capital S and then just type summarize? Oh, it says it's unrecognized. Look at that. It's or perhaps I said summarize diastolic blood pressure. It can't find that variable. Why? Because these things are case sensitive. So let me do summarize, and I'm going to do the proper case here and show what summarized diastolic blood pressure does. And I see that that one worked because I did the correct case there. So that concludes our first getting started video in Stata, where we talked about the 5 windows, some of the important drop-down menus. We opened a Stata file, and we did a few simple commands.